My name is Shivanu. I am the co-founder and CEO of this company called Teamie, and we build social learning platforms. So, I was looking through the entire day, and I went through the conference, and it was great learning for me. The conference is called Serious Games and Social Connect. I think if you look at the agenda, I think I'm the social connect. Everybody else is, serious games, really. So if you don't hear the word games, every second line, please bear with me. I'm really here to talk about how we've, kind of created a platform where we enable concepts of social networking to really enhance the learning process. There are elements of gamification in that, and I'll talk about it. But what I'd like to do is just talk about, through the course of some of the deployments that we've had, and I'll talk about both education as well as enterprise training and enterprise learning kind of scenarios. How has this enabled, and what you need to do to be able to make your classroom or make that entire learning experience more social and fun. And majority of what I talk about is beyond technology, is about what you need to do as a process, or what you need to do as a teacher or as a trainer to be able to enable that. I'll start with this story because it kind of helps me set the context about what is happening around us. And this story really illustrates it very well, because here is a king, a king who has fought many battles. He is he's been doing this all his life. And this morning he's again prepared for his battle. His entire army is ready with their swords and spears. And just about when he's about to go for battle, his advisors come to him. And they say, "Sir, we have these new tools. We have this new technology. We have these machine guns, which if we use in battle, we will be a lot more effective. We'll have lesser casualties. We'll win the war faster. Everything will be good." The king, as you can see, he just said, "Don't bother me with new ideas. I've got a battle to fight." And many of us, as educators, as trainers, we get so bogged down in our own battles that we forget to look around. We forget to look around that the battlefield has changed. That, that no longer is my enemy going to come with the sword and spear. He's be carrying a gun as well. And that we, as educators, as trainers, need to think about what that changing landscape is. What is it that my students are coming with in terms of expectations, or my audience is looking to me when they expect to learn something in the class today? So I'll talk a bit about this changing landscape, and this is something that everybody in this room is very familiar with, so I won't spend a lot of time. The first one is obviously, social. When it comes to a society where we have to put posters like this, where, please exit the building before tweeting about it in case of fire, I think we are reaching that tipping point where social is really becoming a de facto mode of communication, right? It is really coming to a point where that format of communication is becoming more and more popular. Right? If you think about what it does is, it's been around for the longest time. You can compare it to email, you compare it to web forums, and you compare it to what Facebook and Twitter, the style of communication. Essentially, it's just messages still going up, back and forth. You can argue technologically, they're probably sitting in one place and not going back and forth. But the intent is, it is just the format of communication which has changed. And this format is very important today, because what this format brings is it brings a sense of informality in the conversation. It brings a sense of lack of structure in the conversation, which leads to better idea sharing, which leads to the internet. And if you think about just the internet in the last decade, I came to Singapore in 2001, and that was the first time in Singapore I did my first Google search, right? So it was, at that point in time, internet was really about search and commerce. I could go and find stuff, and if I wanted, Amazon and e-commerce sites were really, picking up at that point in time. If you look at the last 5 years, the internet has become a place for collaboration. It is where I go to share things. It is where I go to read about other things that my friend have found interesting. So, it has really changed the way we consume, use the internet. And what has changed the way we consume it is obviously this mobile device, where suddenly we can't live without it, where, our eyes are trained to go back to it every 5 minutes. Even though there is no update, the phone has not buzzed, you will open it and click it and check. I don't know why I do it. I see a lot of people do that as well. But mobile is changing the way we consume information, the way we expect to consume information. And these two things have far-reaching consequences in the way we will have to capture the attention of our audiences, be that in the training room, be that in the classroom. Because, all of the people, and we heard a toddler's best toy is not the soft toy, it is the iPad. Imagine if he walks into your classroom. Imagine if he walks into your workforce, and what's that going to do? And that's what's really happening today. If you think about the workforce, it is changing dramatically. It is not a 9-to-5 job for 5 days a week. It is moving towards what we call a work-life blending approach, where it's not about work-life balance, but really you would expect to work a few days on Saturday, a few hours on Saturday, a couple of hours on Sunday, but it means that you could take off slightly early on Tuesday. And the enterprise is beginning to be okay with that. There is a lot more mobility in the workforce that is coming through, which is really what it is doing is it is making people think about ways in which they can be productive. This is a very interesting study. You could do a whole presentation on it. This was done in the UK by O2, by the telco there, and they said that I will choose some people and I'll ask them to work from home for a day, and we'll see what that leads to. It led to essentially 2,000 hours of saving in terms of the commute that happens, but it led to a lot more hours. About 1,000 hours of that commute time went into work. Some of the other time went to watching TV, into doing house chores and things like that, but they got 50% of that time back, and hence we are seeing a lot of companies being more open to that entire idea of being mobile. What scares everybody when I present this in front of an enterprise audience is Gen Y. Is what will they do and what is it that they expect? Especially in Asia, I think this is a more pronounced trend than in the US, where countries like India and China, where more than 40% of the entire population is under the age of 25, where you have these enormous numbers that are entering the workforce today with a totally different set of expectation. But even if you look at just the learning space, and this is coming to the core education area, that itself, the way we do that is shifting. We're moving to this, we heard the term democratized, right? Democratize access to education, democratize access to the content. And there are phenomenal initiatives that are out there today that allow people to learn on their own. Ministry of Education in Singapore is asking us to move towards a self-directed approach, where the student will define, this is what I want to learn. They will be able to pick up content that is most relevant and personalized to them, and the teacher acts as the facilitator. We are seeing, obviously, the nature of content being delivered change as well. Video, obviously, is becoming more and more introduced into the classroom. We are seeing a lot more teachers beginning to talk about the concept of flipping the classroom, where essentially it means that you do the homework in class and you do the classwork at home. So instead of a teacher telling you x plus y is equal to 8 is a linear equation, you read that up on your own, watch a Khan Academy video, but when you come to class, we'll solve that equation together. And that really is where they're beginning to say that this will help the student understand the concept better, rather than me just reading off the book, which is the education system I went through in India. What we are really moving towards is this sense of less gurus and more peers in the education system, where we are really saying is that teachers, the role is changing, and it was an excellent panel that happened this morning, where the role of the teacher is really changing, where you're not expecting in this world of instant access to information. The answer is something you can find by just tapping a few clicks on your mobile device. But what the teacher now needs to do is, instead of being the source of that information, or the only person who had that book in our class, you have to become the person who will sit by the side and help them solve that problem. So I think we are moving towards this thing where it needs to be a facilitation role rather than a, what they call as the sage on the stage kind of a role that exists today. And it requires a lot of training, and it's great to see initiatives around teacher training for that. So we really think we are entering this new learning paradigm, where if you look at traditional learning and compare it to what we call as social learning, where it's not classroom-based, it's about anytime, anywhere learning, where I have access to information, I can do it at home, I can do it while I am going towards the school. And we see that happen a lot more. Where we are seeing the move towards, instead of being curriculum-based, moving towards sort of an experience-based learning paradigm. And I'll talk about that because both the case studies I'll share today talk about this experience-based mechanism that they use in class. Moving away from syndicated content to personalized content, I think, again, a lot of examples there. Personalization was talked about earlier as well. And really moving away from a teacher-centric scenario to a student-centric scenario, where you put student in the center and you say, okay, this is the content for him, this is what he will plan to learn, and you make him at the center of it, rather than this is the teacher, he will be able to teach these set of things. So we are seeing that transition impact the way you will have to use technology and what that means from a learning standpoint. So I'll share a few best practices that we've come across. And again, this is a slide I use often as well because it very clearly talks about what I'm going to say. What I am going to say are a set of 5 best practices that we've come across. By no means are they exhaustive. Just like the Mayans, I think they did not have enough space beyond 2012. I also just had 30 minutes. I've just put 5 there. So if you don't see something that you use in your class, please don't feel offended. This is by no means scientific research. So The first step that some of the people who've deployed Teamie and how they intended to use Teamie was creating a learning community. They said that I do not want to teach in the enterprise space. They said I don't want to teach them how to go and sell against competition. That is not a classroom training I can do, which is what they currently do. How do I make that into a community so that everybody can interact on that? There's a course running in the university here which is using Teamie, which is around e-commerce models, right? So the teacher says that, I don't want it to be, I talk about a B2C model in lecture 3, basically on week 3, and that is the end of it. How do I make it into an ongoing discussion? And we're seeing, them trying to use essentially the idea of a community to be able to drive that. And the difference here is, it's a very subtle difference. You had communities for the longest time, and you could build that on web forums, ages ago. But I think the difference is, and that is, all thanks to, the likes of Mark Zuckerberg's in the world, which have really brought out this inherent need for us to share, to want to contribute when they see a kind of format of communication. What we're seeing that has to be done to make that work is that you have to still blend it with the physical and formal classroom or training that you're having. So typically in the example that I will share later, what they do is, if they are going to have that sales training, that still is on a calendar. But they use the platform, the community, to be able to inject information over there so that those discussions are brought out during those physical classrooms or during those specific sessions. The idea really being is that they want to extend the classroom beyond the physical classroom. In higher ed especially, we get a lot of feedback from teachers. They say that I get 2 hours per week with my students. What I do in those 2 hours is very critical to how much they will learn at the end of the entire 12-week semester that will come through. So they are saying that if there is a way for me to extend that classroom, that I can get them to talk about this particular topic beyond those 2 hours, they think that adds value to them. And there's lots of things that come with it, which I'll talk about. Second way to make learning more engaging and more social is, create social content. Very duh in that sense, but what it really means is that instead of you creating content, instead of you reading it out of the book, you need to get the student or the learner to create content. Where we are seeing a lot of push towards, the ability to create short videos, anything from 2 to 3 minute videos, where the students are creating that. Or they are sharing information from things that they're doing, when they are outside of the classroom, and bringing that back to a central place where everybody can learn together. So, their intent really here is that the more you share, the more community engagement it drives. It drives a sense of ownership back to that same community that, okay, I created content here. My content is being used by the rest of the class as well. And I think that helps people use that. And this is not about technology, like I said. This is just about things that you need to do in your class to make your class more social. I mean, you could have a Facebook, but if nobody uses it, it's just software. Nothing will happen on that. To make things happen on that, we are seeing a lot of people talk about creating content together with the learners, in that specific room itself. Obviously, there's a hierarchy of what kind of content works more. So video better than infographic, better than PowerPoint, better than text. A lot of engagement happens in that way. But very importantly, we saw TED there. We saw edX. We saw Coursera. We saw Khan Academy. There's lots of open content available today. And you need to, you can just leverage the power of that to be able to instill more community and more engagement and more content within your own classrooms. Because we are really moving into a scenario where the onus of content creation is no longer with that one teacher. You as a teacher can leverage on the content that is really around the world being created by all the maths teachers across this planet. And you just have to bring it back. The only thing that technology can help you do is bring it back in the curated way into your classroom, right? And that is something that can be done. The third thing is really around experiences. And this is where I quote this. This is research done by this lady called Jane Hart, and she's been tracking social learning for a really long time now, way before people thought of it as a trend. And she says that this is an enterprise-specific thing. Sorry about the really bad quality of that image there. But she says that within an enterprise, what people regard as learning, they say that only 14% of them believe that learning through the formal training method is when I actually learn something about my job. 70% of them say that I only learn about my job when I talk to people informally, when I ask them after a meeting has finished. So the examples of when people actually learn things about their job and the times at which they do are really outside of the regular domain or the formal domain of learning processes within that institute. Similarly, if you look at it from a school standpoint, we've had the example where it was a physics teacher, and he said that, okay, he was teaching pulleys. So the assignment he gave to his kids was, go out there, you have your mobile devices, take a photograph wherever you can spot a pulley while you're going back home. Right? Whether that could be where you're seeing during a crane where something is being picked up, or wherever else that you're doing. And share that back with the classroom. And he said that helped drive a lot more engagement around the topic of pulleys than anything else had done. So it was not about that, kids learned specifically more about a pulley just by looking at it. It was just the interest level about pulleys in that classroom went up significantly. And then they started using this whole idea of, wanting them to go out and do something, share it back with the class so that everybody learns together. Right? And that is really the intent that we talk about, where you want to share and build experiences for people rather than push content specifically to them. The fourth one is really around reward and encourage, and this is where gamification comes in, where we've seen that the moment you put in certain kind of incentives, the moment you put in just the badges, just the simple gamification elements, the simplest of them work. And they work at both enterprise as well as student level. And we were very surprised with the request that we got from large telcos wanting to say that, I want to give somebody points when he's finished this training on time. And I want there to be a badge if he's finished 3 trainings of the same track, within the year. And we want to be able to show it with his user profile. And we are seeing those kind of interests come really from an enterprise standpoint more than schools. I went to an international school in Malaysia, and they said, can you remove this gamification thing? They said, I don't want leaderboards. I think it drives competition. So what it really is coming down to, I think it depends on either the school or the individual teacher on how they want to handle that. And which is why I think the idea of letting a teacher decide is fantastic, because that is how we build the platform as well, where you have the choice of deciding how much points you want to give for certain kinds of behavior, and how much you want to be able to show that back on the user's profile. So the ability that people really have here is that once you have a community, once you have people sharing information, once you have people sharing their experiences, what do you assess? What do you give more weightage to? Right? So is it that you at the end of the training you still have a exam and everybody passes that, and that is good enough, just like how we do in education right now? Or should you drive behavior towards something else? And that is where the people who had put more weightage on just participation is where they saw a lot more kind of interest in taking one quiz, but also multiple quizzes, and I'll share that in the in the example that we have. So really driving engagement through that. And finally, I think the point around teaching and not teaching but facilitating, and this entire thing fails. All the other 4 points I said fail if the teacher is not doing this particular role. We had 2 classrooms in one of the university which was running. In one of the classrooms, it was left fairly informal. In the other classroom, there was a very defined structure that you can only talk about these 3 things in this community, that you will only be allowed to talk about this assignment after 1 week of the assignment has passed. There was a very strict structure put in place into this this social community. And that did not work at all. Neither did people talk about those 3 topics. They didn't talk about any topic. Right? So the idea of policing or the idea of trying to, be the person controlling the community is something that doesn't work on any kind of a social platform. And which is why I think, this is a skill set, I think. And this is a skill set that needs to be kind of trained, and that needs to be brought into the teachers. To do all of that, obviously, you need a social platform to do this, and this is the shameless plug that I have about Teamie. But essentially, what you need is any platform that will enable you to be able to drive and create a social community, enable you to be able to use it as a learning tool. Because you still want to do some of the basic elements of learning. You still want to have some element of assessment. And if you think about assessments, assessments can also be quests. And these are things that teachers told us, where you have the ability for letting them collaborate, giving them the option of gamification. Because it works in certain scenarios. In certain scenarios, it is, you are not sure how it will happen. Right? And I think there needs to be a sense of maturity, in the class and, amongst that entire school for people to accept that. So I'll quickly go into the case studies. So this one is a higher ed case study. This is the e-commerce module at a very large university. What they did was, so they obviously, this is a Teamie deployment. So they wanted a community for student-teacher discussions. This is how the professor approached us. They heard about us. They said that I want a community where people can keep on discussing about what I teach in class beyond those 2 hours. Because she said, frankly, even in those 2 hours, they don't engage with me. I ask a question, there'll probably be at best 2 hands going up, and I really don't get feedback. So what she did was, she said that I have a class of 150. I also want to break it down into teams. I want to create teams of 10, 15 people each with that entire thing. So there's this one big group, and there are these smaller networks within that you have created with it. The biggest feedback that we got through this was from students saying that in all my other classes that I take in the university, I never get to know the rest of my class better. Here, I'm getting to hear feedback from so many other people that I would have not really interacted with. So this is a university setup. I'm hanging out with my group of 5 people. I make a project with those 5 people only. So they're saying that the level of interaction really increased significantly through this. The other big feedback that we got was that from the professor's standpoint, she said that it reduced my workload, which was the biggest surprise for us, because this, if you think about it, is another avenue for the teacher to go and answer questions in. Because this is a platform where students are asking things, you need to be able to go there and do stuff. What she said was, a student asks the question, another student comes in and answer, 2 others come in and pitch in as well. So all we had to do was build in just facilitation tools. So what we did was, we built in a good answer button. So think of Facebook, think of somebody posting something, other people commenting, and there's a button called good answer which only the teacher sees. The teacher presses that button, it moves it to the top, it gets highlighted through the UI. So other students looking at that information later also knows this is the direction the professor wants us to think in. Or this is what she is suggesting as the correct approach to that particular problem. So it really helped her reduce answering questions, or what used to really happen with her was she used to get emails for one-on-one sessions with students, and that was very taxing for her. So this became a great avenue for her to be able to reduce that. The other thing that really got built in was they got each of those teams to create quizzes. I write quizzes here, but she changed the term to quests. She got each of those teams to create a set of questions that they think are important for any business, any e-commerce business to start. What should I answer if I'm going to start this e-commerce business of my own? And she got everybody to create that quiz, and she then gets that to be shared with the rest of the group. And everybody else then gets to take that and validate their own business ideas and give feedback on, hey, you missed on that point. So the peer feedback and the peer learning was far better than just the one project which the teacher or the professor herself would have graded. So that was another major feedback that we got, was that peer feedback process significantly helped in people really validating their own ideas and getting more feedback about what they have learned. And the last point was really around the rewards piece. So now this is a professor, so she could really define certain things. And next semester this would be used for a gamification module in the same university as well, where they defined weekly challenges. So we have a points mechanism on the platform. For every action you do, you get points. You share something, you get points. You ask a question, you get points. You answer somebody else's question, you get points. You are the first 10% to submit the assignment, you get points. So there are points for potentially any event that happens on the platform and for you as a user. So the way it helps us, it helps us break down your interactions into social and academic actions. And as a professor, she now has the liberty to choose what she wants to, or where she wants students to focus more on. What kind of behavior does she want to drive? And using that interface, she could create these kind of point limits and challenges that were there. The other reason they had to create point limits was because this classroom exploded. The number of discussions that were happening there were literally too much for the professor to cope with, because if somebody has something that requires her attention, it does become an overhead. So so she had to put in metrics that would enable people to stop talking after a while, or we had to build in an event trigger of what is a good question. You only get a point if 3 other people have answered a question. That means it is interesting enough for people to look at, right? So those were the kind of things that we had to do there. The other thing that she got us to do was custom badges, where a lot of things do not happen online, do not happen on platforms. But you still want this to be the place where everybody gets to show it off, everybody gets to bring it to the attention of the rest of the world. And the custom badges pieces really helped over there. So we saw this significantly drive the amount of engagement that was happening there in class. It reduced significantly the number of one-on-one student meetings that she used to do when she compares the same class last semester. So, from an individual professor time that went down, from the time that the students had in terms of interacting with a larger set of group, that went up. The feedback exercise by far is the biggest feedback that we've gotten from a student standpoint in terms of how that helped really validate a lot of the other things that they were doing, which they thought would not have happened if it was just a written exam that they would have done, which, by the way, will still happen in this case. So it is not that this is taking that away. The other example is really from the enterprise standpoint, and this is sort of the second case study I have. So this is a consulting firm. It's a really leading consulting firm. This is for their Asia Pacific operations, where they have about 10 offices across Asia. Their biggest challenge was, we are training people in Singapore and in Malaysia more than we are training people in Korea and Australia and Taiwan offices. So the first major challenge was, how do I just enable that? If you think about it, any tool, any online tool can do that. The second major challenge was that there's a very big disconnect, and this happens in many organizations, is that sales is sales, product is product, marketing is marketing, support is support, right? And there was, it was very tough for them to break those kind of organizational silos and boundaries to come up with something really good, in terms of an overall enterprise effort. And what they trialed this with was, they trialed with a competitive sales strategy community. So what was very interesting here was that they did not choose to make it like a training track. They did not say that this is where we will teach you, spin selling, which is a typical training that you would go through for sales training certifications. They made it very topical, very relevant, very issue-based for the people, within that organization. The second thing that they did was, they did not just invite salespeople to be part of that network. They invited people from product. They invited people, from basically the consulting side, the project managers, to be part of that team as well. And then what really happened was that ideas started to flow based on not just the salesperson's feedback that we lost that deal because of price or whatever else. It started flowing from everybody else within the organization as well. And then what they got to do was, they really encouraged their employees, every sales guy who won a competitive deal, they got to make a 2-minute video with that person. And if you think about the tools that they used, was their iPhone. It is good enough to make a decent quality video, just standing on the backdrop of a blank screen and just talk about what you did. And that 2-minute video by a peer talking about, this is what I did to win that deal, was far more effective than, the 40-slider training deck that they typically used to use. And that really changed, the way people started looking at this community, because there was lots of skepticism when we launched this in that setup. Because people thought this is just a way for me to track things better and things like that. For them, obviously, enterprise has more structured ways for people to, incentivize. So, there was obviously HR involvement and things like that. So they had real-world gifts that they were giving to good ideas that were coming over there. But the most interesting feedback for us was that the business unit leaders, typically, the most senior people in the organization who want to be part of this but can only look at it once a quarter, now they could look at it at their own time and come and contribute to a discussion which is happening on a deal in Australia, which is probably just worth, not very much for that particular company. And I think that involvement really drove this entire process a lot more. So that kind of revalidated the interest everybody in the organization had towards that one particular goal. The idea of the learning community worked because it was very topical. The fact that it was people sharing about what they did rather than this is the enterprise mandate, I think worked again very well. So, in summary, really, it was just about all of them were struggling to be able to enter that particular room, or they were really, the battlefield in that sense had changed for them, and there was a strong need for them to engage them in other platforms and other mechanisms. The key things to remember, and this really sort of is the takeaway, is that, through this exercise, we realized that the community was bigger than the classroom. That user-generated content was bigger than the syndicated content that was being given to them. That when people shared their experiences, that was far more powerful than the curriculum-based text that was provided to them. And that when you engaged people and started measuring that, that was better than the assessment that was really happening for them. Technology in all of this is only an enabler. Unfortunately for me, coming from a technology background and a technology company, you could have done this. Many of these things could have been done without any technology platform. But you needed, in some cases, technology to be an enabler, to make that happen. So I'll just leave you guys with, a favorite quote which fits, I think, in every situation. So every morning in Africa, when the sun rises, a gazelle wakes up and says to himself, "If I don't run faster than the cheetah, I will die." Every morning in Africa, when the sun rises, a cheetah wakes up and says to himself, "If I don't run faster than the gazelle, I will starve." It really doesn't matter if you think you're a cheetah or a gazelle, but every morning when the sun rises, you better be running.